Welcome to the first episode of this year's Chat Cafe series, where real students talk about real issues. I'm your host and SMOB, Josh Mahumza. Today, the topic will be equity in BCPS. We will hear from our diverse panel of students that will talk about how facets of their identity and experiences in Baltimore County shape their view on whether the county is moving towards closing the equity gaps. Here today is Nick, Marcelis, Maya, Zahir, Keza, Peju, Sahib, and Joyce. So let's get started. So for the first question, I'm just wondering, what does social and educational equity mean to you? And anybody feel free to answer.
I can go ahead and start. So when I think of social and educational equity, I imagine a school environment where everybody, including students, faculty, and staff, can engage in a learning environment where they feel respected and affirmed regardless of any of their identities, whether that pertain to race, gender, class, religion, so on and so forth. So when we talk about social and educational equity, we have to talk about how we can change practices and systems to better accommodate everybody, regardless of how they identify.
Yes. Anybody else want to go? And I totally agree, Nick.
Yeah, what Nick just said, what social and educational equity means everyone should get fairly. No students feel sort of there's some bias or people are looking at them the wrong way. It's just where everyone can feel at home and you can learn and not worry about people judging you, your race or background, where you come from.
I'm just curious, what have you seen in your schools? Has it been good experiences or not so good?
Overall, it's been good. You know, there's obviously a bad situation that has happened to me throughout, but you know, it's been overall a good experience throughout my like educational, like all up to this point where I'm in ninth grade. I only had one or two experiences that were racially motivated, but overall is a good experience. Like somewhat like good environment to have educational wise and be focused and stuff like that.
I can say the same thing about my school. I can only say I've never encountered any problems because our school is majority Black. We don't have a big diversity in our school. So, which is kind of not a good or bad thing because I like to be exposed to different religions and different people. So it's kind of like I'm one sided with just African Americans. So I can say that at my school, we don't have certain those racial issues. So which means when we get into those issues, we don't know how to directly handle them.
Personally, for me, luckily I haven't experienced racially targeted like incidents towards me, but I have noticed like some of my friends or classmates get into situations like that, and my school doesn't usually handle them well. Like we have a lot of incidents where no consequences were given and we just kind of like pushed it aside and didn't deal with it. If that makes sense.
I feel like at my school, I'm right in the middle. I've had one or two racially driven incidents. They didn't hurt me as a person. Sometimes, like, why are they targeting me? Are the people involved? But I feel like overall, in terms of race, I feel like my school, overall, I feel like it's not too bad as a situation.
Personally for me, I haven't. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, personally for me, I haven't had any racially motivated targets or incidents happen to me. I know some of my friends or classmates have, as well as how Marceli said that we don't really know how to go forth with these incidents. But personally for me, I haven't had it.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to this from an interesting perspective, right? As a person who's attended both predominantly minority, like Black schools within BCPS and predominantly white institutions, as a person who identifies as both Black and LGBTQ+, when I went to the majority Black schools, I more so faced animosity based on my, sexual orientation and gender identity, Whereas when I went to the predominantly white schools, it shifted to being more about my race. And my school did unfortunately recently have a scandal involving racism with some videos of students engaging in unsavory activity, we'll say, resurfacing on the Instagram. And so that's something we're trying to process right now. But I also want to point out that when we talk about discrimination within a school system, yes, there are individual incidents, but we also have to talk about the systemic wide, marginalization that certain groups of people are going to face. So yeah, there are interpersonal incidents, and those are important to talk about, but we should also always be keeping in mind the systems and the structures that work together to disenfranchise certain groups of people and how we can dismantle those.
Yeah, I was going with Nick. I have been at both majority, minority, and most majority, predominantly white schools. Me personally, it was more like for me being in a predominantly white school for most of my life. It was only until last year I felt like it was something that was racially motivated, and like that was personally happened to me, where like a white kid called me black trash and really just like hurt me, and it was all because I didn't want to give them my notes, even though they had spent a lot more time. Like we had to share notes, and we had I was going to give them their notes, but I had time to write them down because it was yet again, it had bad handwriting, and I had to write down and try to decipher. And they called me black trash, and someone with another, a right-leaning political stance said at that time something political, which really hurt my feelings. And that was the first time I ever had something racially motivated that really hurt me. And took I had to step back and say, hey, it was kind of like a wide opener that that I'm different from you and you're different from me. It was it was more like a learning experience because I never had faced that in my life. It was more like an eye awakening thing that I faced.
Yeah. And I just wanted to go back, piggyback to Nick's comments, and I think they're really important. Me, myself, when I was understanding what equity and some of the challenges other demographics face, I always had this view about race being it and didn't really see how some of the other struggles of other groups, whether it's gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic level, orientation, how they were interconnected in some way. So who has any comments on that, whether how their gender has affected them? Anybody who hasn't spoken yet has any comments?
I'll just speak on what you just mentioned with on the topic of intersectionality, Josh. At my school, I didn't experience this personally, but there was an incident involving a disabled student last year. And I think we just need to make sure that we're recognizing all facets of identity in the sense of when we're talking about equity. Everything Nick brought up was obviously super valid. And same with gender identity, everything along those lines. Some things people cannot control, obviously. But I think sometimes we overlook it in the name of doing other things. But I think that the disabled community especially is someone who we need to pay attention to, is a group we need to pay attention to when trying to achieve equity.
Yeah. Anybody, Saeed, I haven't heard from you. Do you want to have any comments? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay. I definitely agree with Maya. I feel like more common things of equity are like gender identity, ethnicity, like you mentioned, socioeconomic status, and obviously race. But we usually forget about the disabled groups, and maybe forget is not the right word to use, but we are worrying about race and all of those things where they're not given that type of maybe importance or that type of equity that they also deserve, because I'm sure that it's also very, very hard for them to do their day-to-day things, and they're facing inequality that some of us might not be facing, and it's hard for us to look at things through their lens. So I definitely agree with Maya on that point, and I do agree with everything that Nick has said so far regarding race and gender identity.
Yeah. And Nick, just to go back to you, and I don't want to put you on the spot again, but I know you mentioned that although you did go to a minority majority school, and you do identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, you did face discrimination because of that part of your identity. So can you talk about that? Because I'm sure many minority students who who identify as LGBTQ face similar discrimination. Can you talk about some of that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, like when I went to, this was mostly in elementary and middle school. When I went to majority and minority institutions, I would face, just basic people not really wanting to hang around me, people more so thinking that I was gross, undesirable, what have you. It wasn't necessarily like consistent bullying and harassment, but it was a more subtle feeling of, oh, like this kid's weird, like let's not touch him. Yeah, which is I think important to understand too, right? Because we often think of discrimination as like this big ethereal thing, when oftentimes like no, it can be as subtle as like asking a Black girl whether her hair is real, right? Or like, something as like asking a Hispanic kid whether he speaks English rather than just speaking to him in English and seeing if he does, right? Like it's not this huge, showy, dramatic thing all the time. Sometimes it's really subtle, and we have to talk about those subtle ways that discrimination manifests as well.
Mm-hmm. Anybody has similar comments to this?
I loved how Nick just like worded that. That was great. I don't really have anything to say. I just really willing to comment that it is microaggression, as you said before. That it's not. It's often is just is your hair real? Why are you this way? Why are you that way? Why is your pronouns this way? Why are you she they? Why are you he they? It's just these like little subtle. It's not like this big thing that, oh, you're this. It's very subtle, and it makes you think. That like, oh, like stuff like that.
Yeah. What her and Nick said, I'm talking about little microaggressions. Like when I was at elementary school, it was predominantly white, and they say stuff like, "Can I touch your hair?" or "Why do you do this?" or "Why do you do this?" I'm thinking, "Oh, here or this." I wasn't thinking about the bigger issue that multiple kids are having to face. It wasn't just me; it was everyone. So I was thinking that, yeah, that can be microaggression, make someone feel unheard or not appreciated, and that can really hurt someone's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say I agree with what Nick said. Like, it made me think of experiences that I had, and mostly in middle school, it was just like stereotypes that people assumed about me that were like not wrong. Well, yeah, they were wrong. Like people would assume I'd be like loud and I like a certain type of music. And since I didn't at that time, they were like, "Oh, so you act white." And I'm just like, "Oh, no." Like it was those type of stereotypes. People kept calling me names like that because I didn't fit what they imagined a Black girl to be like. Mm-hmm. And that kind of like affected me somehow, like on my identity, like, oh, I'm not how I'm supposed to be, like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just piggybacking off of Teju, about stereotypes especially. So in my elementary school, which wasn't either predominantly white or Black, it was mixed, but it had a very small ratio of South Asian students, so me being one of them. And growing up, like I grew up here my entire life, so there's always a thing of like connecting back to your culture. And I was like one of those students that I do recognize my culture and I do love it and I do embrace it. Mm-hmm. So if I would ever take like Indian food to school and, there would be like a whole, thing of stereotypes, and that kind of stuck to me. And I've seen how like I had dramatically like the amount of times that I did take Indian food to school had dramatically decreased. And although that's a really small thing and it didn't really drive me away from my culture, but I think that that's a problem that like immigrant families and immigrant students can face here because of the amount of like judging and stereotyping that they have to face. And even like we see videos surfacing the internet where people are like, oh, we've been called like curry munchers or, all those type of things. Like you smell like a certain way and you smell this, like even though those things may or may not be true, depending on like the kids or the students, it makes that place in your heart, like, wait, okay, like I can't do this, or I'm going to be stereotyped this way. And I think it can really drive people away from like their culture, things that they want to still be connected to. because then people will stop embracing their culture, whether that's at school, outside of school, and just trying to adapt. And adaptation is definitely a good thing. But again, if it is driving you away from your culture against your wishes, but very like unconsciously, then I feel like that's also something that's really unfair, and does connect to what Paige was saying about stereotypes. Like, it made her think like, wait, like I'm not really how I'm supposed to be. And it's like those standards is like something that we strive to fill our entire lives. But it's like, whose standards are we really trying to meet?
Yeah, I want to piggy off of both of them. Like saying that, like, oh, that I was like this stereotype that like my parents, they're not African American. They're actually Caribbean, and like they're from the Caribbean, and they came up. I'm the first generation American. So my cousins, but we're not going to get into them right now. So basically, growing up, I am from the Caribbean, so I have South Asian and Black in me. So I would eat curry and all that, and it was like, oh, like why do you smell, and like everything, like stuff like that. And I could feel the similar situations, and that especially going to a mostly minority stuff, right? That, and like being in a mixed environment too, that say that like, why do you talk this certain way? Why do you what they would say is, why would you talk white? Or why do you try to fit in? Why do you try to act white, quote unquote, act white? And I realized, like, only like a couple months ago, that I realized that last year I realized that there's no certain way to be who you are. There's no black. It's not all black and white, as everyone say, like, oh, you're acting white or you're acting black. It's a very colorful, like, monochromatic scale. There's no way to be your race. There's no way to be Asian. There's no way to be black. And there's some people that are those street style stuff like that, but I'm personally not that type of person. I like to express myself. I like to just because I talk, like, for people to understand me more, because I feel like, well, there's a lot of things called code switching, which I do a lot. Right now, currently, I'm using my code switch voice, which is people are going to use to, like, for my audience, so I could, for people to understand me and hear me out for my experiences. So it's not just black and white. It's a very chromatic scale to just be who you are, and not just like have these stereotypes just weigh on you. And that weighed on me for a really long time, and it made me feel so self-conscious. But now that I realize that it's not just so black and white, and it's just, there's no way to be you, there was this switch in my brain that, like, it made me so much happier.
No, I appreciate this conversation because it's really important, and I'm sure a lot of our students can relate to a lot of your experiences and are probably experiencing it right now. And I just want to go back to the topic of educational equity, because I think it's really important, and it's one that it's a conversation that has really started to occur in the last couple of years, or taken as seriously because of students like you, community leaders pushing for these conversations, and it's really important. And when I think about educational equity, I'm thinking structural things that are current, that are not helping our students of color or minorities succeed in, or even economic status. And the equity committee on the board recently did an audit, and it verified that it was our students of color, our Hispanic students, our special needs students, and our Native students are the ones who are performing the lowest or have high absence rates. So I don't know if you guys might have anything to speak about this, but what have you seen in your schools in terms of how teachers teach, how different curriculars and different policies implemented in your school? What do you think? Have they been helpful in closing the achievement gaps?
So for me, I think first thing we have to do is understand what equity is versus what equality is, because I think that's the big thing that gets intertwined. They do work together, but they're two different things. So when I think of the two, I think of like a quote that we had at my Renaissance Equity seminar. It's basically equality is giving everybody a shoe. Equity is making sure that shoe fits for that one person. So when we talk about educational equity, is meaning, let's say the devices. Okay, we're giving every student a device that's equal. That's the thing that we should do. But you don't know if every student has Wi-Fi in the house. So now they're back at a different challenge. So we stepped up, we gave them devices, but now we're still missing the other part. So it's saying in my school, like I said, we don't have those issues. Our issues between are not white, black, or Indian, or that. It's more so the things that we have going on in our houses. So I'm blessed to have certain things, but another student doesn't. And the problem is they don't speak up about it. So we don't know what's really going on. So when we come to school and we see someone who's been wearing the same shirt for the same couple of days because they don't have that luxury of washing clothes or have that stuff, and we have to be able to help them out or say something. It has to become normal for us to do that because we all want to have the same path. Or if that student doesn't have the necessary tools to be ready for school, and then so when I say like the graphing calculator, I think always makes me upset because not everybody can go buy a T8 calculator. That's a very expensive thing. So you can't expect us to put that on a supply list and expect them to come. So that's when equity comes into play. You don't know what every household has. And I think my school is closing that gap when we're trying to figure out, okay, let's look at everyone, but see what actually is going on with each of one of them so we can help them strive to be the best. And I think that's something that we have to work on all throughout the system. And because equity, I can say, has never been addressed head on. It's always been pushed to the side, or we'll get to it when it's becoming a problem. Like the summer when these racist things started to happen, that's when, okay, let's push for diversity in Baltimore County. That's when that became a real issue, because till then, if nothing would have happened, it still would have been pushed to the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like in addition to that, when we're talking about educational equity, in addition to like the differences in access to resources that we see between different groups of people, we've also got to talk about these curriculums, y'all, right? Like, why is the only time me, a Black person, seeing myself in reading books when I'm a slave? Like, can we talk about that? Like, I've been in Baltimore County schools all my life, and some of the only times I've seen myself represented in curriculums is when I'm a slave. And as an LGBTQ plus person, I never see myself represented in the Baltimore County curriculum, right? So we have to talk about that too, because if Black kids and kids of color and LGBTQ plus kids are either never seeing themselves or only seeing themselves in a negative light, what do you think they're going to think about themselves? What do you think their self-conceptualization is going to be, right? So we can't like have a narrow view of what this conversation around educational equity should surround. It can't just be, oh, let's make sure that Black kids and white kids have equal suspension rates. Let's make sure that there's no like culturally biased dress code policies. We have to talk about from the ground up what's in the curriculum, what's going on in these teachers' heads, what's going on behind these boardrooms, who's making decisions for us. What is Baltimore County Council doing to make sure that Black and white kids are playing on an equal playing field and seeing themselves equally and having an equally positive self-conceptualization of themselves, you know?
What Marcellus was saying before about equality and equity, like it's a big jump from everyone gets something to you get something personalized for you. So the BCPS doesn't understand what's going on in their household, giving every kid devices that matter. So like if you expect kids to have stuff or expect kids to do stuff, it's not gonna matter at the end of the day if it's not made for each kid. Like if the same kid's wearing the same shirt every day, or if the same kid doesn't have access to certain materials we need for school, like paper or pencils, how is that kid supposed to grow and thrive later in the world?
Of course. I want to like piggyback off of what Nick said, saying that like, yeah, it's what like every like when we in the curriculum, when we do like read about Black people, we read about when we were a slave, and like I was just like, yeah. And it's funny because you mentioned that, because when like I was like, oh, it's Black History Month, and then I remembered that the last time I ever like did a project or even learned about Black history is when I was in 5th grade. I'm in 9th grade now. I'm in 9th grade now. So I feel like this should be in the curriculum. We should learn about Black leaders and Black voices. It shouldn't just be something on the announcements. We should write about it. We should learn about Black history. It should be ingrained in the curriculum for people of color. Everyone, it should be ingrained in the system, and it's just not.
I also feel like I'm sorry. Okay. I also feel like we shouldn't learn about Black history only in Black History Month. Like, I feel like it should be spread out in a time, because it's like, okay, when we think about February, we only think about Black history. And I feel as though I want to talk about Black history in October. I want to talk about Black history in January. Why do I have to wait until one certain month to learn about myself, to learn about culture, to learn about ancestors, to learn about different important Black leaders? So I also feel like that needs to change, because I'm tired of always like waiting for a certain month or a certain day to talk about people that look like me. So
I agree with Joyce. Like how we only learn about it in February, it kind of feels like, well, we gave them this, so that should cover it. Like it feels like just something that they put there to make everyone happy or whatever. But I feel like that's not really doing anything. It's just, I feel like I don't know how to put it in words, but I hope you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely get what you mean. It's just like, it's just something that like, hey, like we've done all these bad things to you. Here you go. 1 month. Here you go. Be happy. And then all the other months is just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's just exactly how you worded it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
sorry, you can go real quick. Last point.
Yeah, so I thought another example what Joyce and everyone was saying about a certain assignments where you can't even see yourself. I think of assignments that are automatically like, where are the Black people? Like in history class, I did an assignment about 1776. We're learning about people, we're learning about only white people. Like, where would you want to be in 1776? And I was thinking, me as a Black male, where would I be? I would be enslaved, or even if I wasn't enslaved, I wouldn't have privileges. So I'm saying there's certain assignments that are really, really biased and aren't fair to all students. I mean, it's a question: am I here or am I seen? So it's nice.
Yeah, and you guys make great points about inclusivity in our curriculum and just in the county in general. And I think that was one of the topics of discussion this year when we were implementing equity and anti-racist policies, whether it's including Black authors, Asian authors into the curriculum, implementing those changes, making sure that our Muslim minorities have equitable sorry, I'm losing my mind right now. We voted to include their holidays, and we can celebrate them and have all for their holidays as other religious groups. So things like that. I know there's still a lot of work ahead, whether it's with our female students, making sure the dress code is equitable. They have been targeted the most. Whether it's our LGBTQ students, making sure when we're teaching things like subjects in health, or whether it's bathrooms or how they want to identify. I think those are important discussions that need to take place. But I appreciate your comments. And just one factor I also wanted to focus on, because I feel like when we talk about equity at times, we focus on race a lot. And although it's a big topic, and it's one that we all know or have experienced in some way, at times we forget our lower socioeconomic students who they're dealing with things with their race, but also have to deal with financial issues, not being able to afford certain things, not having access to certain opportunities as many of us have right now. So I guess what I would ask is, in terms of your identity, and you don't have to comment on this, but do you feel that you are that you have been put in at a disadvantage or an advantage with your peers? And if you are an advantage, what do you think we could do to help close those gaps?
I feel like, sorry. So I feel like I've been very privileged all my life. I feel like I've been, right now, my computer, like my school computer just stopped working. My parents for Christmas bought me $1,000 MacBook. And that's privilege. Someone cannot afford that. And especially back in school, one of my peers said that, oh, I don't have Wi-Fi. It's stuff like that. Like, I know that I'm very privileged to just even like be on here like with you guys on my MacBook right now. And I feel like to close that gap is to I feel like we need more like BCPS hotspots, maybe more like places where people can access Wi-Fi near their house, so they don't have to leave their house or drive, because some people can't drive. So I feel like we need more spots where there's accessible for a lot of people around the county.
So I was gonna say, like, I don't think I've been put at a disadvantage, but there are some times I'm just like, I don't feel like that's fair. Like what Marcellus said about the graphing calculators. I was in geometry for about 2 semesters before I actually was able to get a graphing calculator, because I could not afford it. My parents didn't want to like get $100 calculator. So I kind of like forced myself to manage. I didn't do so well in that class because I had to do everything by hand and learn outside of school how to do it by hand. And I kind of feel like that put me at a disadvantage, but my teacher would be like, well, it's your responsibility to make sure you have all the necessary things for class. I was like, oh, I can't do that. She was like, you can borrow one from school. And it was never any to borrow because everybody else couldn't afford the calculator. Like, I wasn't the only one. So it was like situations like that. There's also like other situations, like in art class, I couldn't get the sketchbook that I needed. So I got points deducted because I used like copy paper. And this happened like a lot throughout my childhood. Obviously, like now I'm more like at an advantage and I'm happy for that, but there's some students who aren't, and like some friends of mine who aren't, and I don't want them to have to go through what I went through. Like, it's affecting my education directly, and I don't feel like anyone should have to have that type of setback.
Yeah, I think with the conversation around like socioeconomic disadvantage and discrimination, it's interesting, right? Because unlike with some other identities, like maybe race or gender, like you can't tell if somebody's poor by looking at them, right? Like they don't just have it written on their forehead, but like you can tell I'm Black. Like, just look at me, I'm Black, okay? But I feel like when we have this conversation around socioeconomic inequality within our school system, we have to talk about not just the access to resources, but the much larger culture, especially within Baltimore County Public Schools. I've seen that just this culture of not understanding that's often perpetuated by teachers, right? Like, there are some kids, not me personally, I'm in a privileged position where I don't live this existence, but there are kids who are like working multiple jobs, right? Like after school to take care of themselves and their families. There are kids who like don't have access to a car, so they have to walk every day and they may be like a couple minutes late. And then you have teachers and administration who aren't necessarily very accommodating and will still, punish them, discipline them, and speak to them as if they have the same resources or access as a kid of a higher socioeconomic status. And it doesn't make sense to me. And I think that we need to have this conversation about how we can change this culture and become more empathetic and understanding to the needs and struggles of kids who suffer from financial disadvantage, right? Like, we have to do something because currently, as it is, there's just such a lack of empathy and such a funneling of kids through a system that doesn't care about them as individuals and only sees them as entries in a grade book or numbers on a piece of paper. And that's not okay, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, that was super well said, Nick. I definitely agree with everything you just said, and very eloquent. I appreciate it. Along with that, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but doesn't your school, how many APs does your school offer?
It's much less than most schools. I don't have the number right now, but it's not that many.
Yeah, like I was talking to someone who attends like a lower income school, and they were talking about how many APs they had offered. I think it was like 1 or 2. And like my school offers 20, 15. And what do they tell you about I know Marcelo's just like winding his eyes. Like, I mean, I'm not sure mine offers 20, but I know schools that do offer 20. And I think that, what do they tell you about AP classes? Like, you need them to get into a good college. So what's the domino effect of that? If you go to a school that doesn't offer AP classes, then you have to make the extra effort to do dual enrollment. Then you have to pay the extra money to do dual enrollment. And so, like, I know some people have lived this reality and some people just actually like don't have the resources to do that. But then it's like, then what college can you get into? Obviously, like if you're lucky, maybe you could still get into a very high college, but it's rigged against you, and it creates a domino effect in which then are you stuck in the cycle of poverty or lower income status because you weren't provided those resources that other people were provided just because of where they live in the county.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up AP
maybe
classes,
that
because I have my personal opinions about the College Board and a lot of the programs they provide. I'm going to start with AP. Although many schools offer AP classes, but look at the class in general. What's the makeup of the minority and majority students? Even if a minority student is in that class, does he or she have the resources to succeed? I know a lot of people who are able to succeed in AP classes, me included. I have AP books. I buy one every class I take with SATs. I buy one, and the money's gonna add up. You're gonna see yourself in the hundreds, even possibly thousands, paying for these books, paying for tutoring services and other resources. Because although College Board says welcomes people in their classes, there's a lot of things outside of schoolwork that people have to do to really score those fives, those high scores and high SAT scores to get into good colleges, like you mentioned. And I guess what I would say is, although we're offering the AP classes, I think we need to go above that. I think we need to offer tutoring services after school, or even on the weekend. I think we need to invest in more prep books, resources that students can use at home, and just in general, including making sure that teachers are working with students one-on-one at times. Some students who are failing in AP, at times they find it hard to come to their teachers, and they just stay quiet. They keep taking tests and they keep failing, and their grade is severely affected. So who was commenting?
I was gonna
yeah.
comment. You would okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't, like, at the end of the year AP has to take a test where you have to pay money?
Yeah. Certain schools, the Title I schools have they get paid through farms and other federal resources, but other schools have to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you guys have been saying, that like it is rigged. The whole college system is rigged for, you say, for the higher income families. That it's for, like you guys basically say, it's for the rich to stay rich and the poor to stay poor, and that the people that have lower income families can't move out or like get the education that they need to like move out of their low income families and become, I guess, better in their better in life, because they're not giving the resources that they need, because prep books are expensive, SAT books are expensive, AB, like tutoring is expensive. It adds up. You get in debt and more debt, and then you have to, and then, you know, as a lot, like as you guys have been saying, that like, you know, you study to like 1 a.m. and then you go to school, you fail this test because you're really tired, and it's basically just rigged. But I feel like we need to change that.
Yeah, so going over everyone's point, I had a couple thoughts saying about how, so like certain schools have enough income, or certain areas have enough income for like avid classes, no, not avid, AP classes. Like certain AP classes, like they're predominantly white, or only one or two person of color or black is in the class. So that can sort of single the kid out, because in these classes, if they're all white and the teacher's white too, there can be sort of microaggressions like, how are you in here? Or you don't really need to be in here. So it's understanding that the school system needs to change, be more open to all students, person of color, not to be in these AP classes, because these AP classes prepare you for college.
I wanted to comment on what you were saying about AP classes. At my school, I think as a freshman, they like gathered us and talked about AP classes and everything. And the teacher in charge, she was like, well, if you sign up for this AP class, you're gonna have to take a test at the end. It costs this much money. You're probably gonna need books. It costs this much money. And I was sitting at a table with my friends, and they were all being like, I can't like pay for all that. Like, why would I take this class if I'm not even going to take the test at the end? Because really, there's no point of taking an AP if you don't take the test, because you don't get the college credit unless you're just there for the educational experience, which I doubt anyone is. But like that, oh, I forgot where I was going with that, but I signed up for the AP class and some of my friends did too. And there was 3 Black kids in there and then the rest were white. And I was just like, why didn't anyone else sign up for the class? And then they were like, oh, I can't afford it. And I'm just like, oh, this is like good for college. We should like all be in this class so we can succeed. And I felt like nobody forced them to take the regular classes, but it was kind of like, I don't know. It was like glad that they should.
I see where you're going, because we have seen that a large percent of our minority students do actually fall in that low income bracket, and although there are resources, I know I mentioned farms and other federal and state resources provided to our students. At times, what we see is they don't know about it, or it's just a conscientious decision between them and their family where they can't afford it, and that's a sad shame. Anybody else had a comment on this?
I want to like bounce back to when we talk about this low income, all that stuff. I think the one thing we have to tackle head on is that we have to be able to let students ask for help or let them know, because I feel as though we make it seem like it's the worst thing possible to say, hey, I can't afford this, I can't do this. And so maybe if we can advocate like it's okay, we understand, like, and that's when Nick said lacking empathy. I don't see teachers doing that on the first day, like, hey, this test costs this much money, if you can't make that, let me know, we can work something out.
Yeah,
because it's just like, let's go the extra mile to make sure that we all have the same playing field. And so maybe we bring awareness to that, and it's just really, that's something that we can, as students, we can advocate for, we can talk about all we want, but when it comes down for students trying to help teachers, that's the last thing, the last resort that they're going to want to go to. It's going to obviously have to be you, or it's going to have to be the board, because we can talk all day saying, I can go to my principal and say, well, he said the test costs this much money. He didn't even bother to see if anybody was willing to help pay. And so it's like, and like you said, with the different state and federal that can help you out, I didn't even know that. So when I paid the AP test, the way it worked was they told us the test costs this much, but if you're already a low income, like if you pay for free reduced lunch, then the test is paid for. And then when that happened, everybody was like, what? Because not one, like they just called it out, but it was just, they could have did that in a different way. And so then it's like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. And so I'm just saying, maybe we need to bring awareness and involve in all. That's the only way we can fix that gap, is by starting with showing empathy for students, or showing empathy for the idea, or getting rid of the test in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, especially if we're going to talk about like the AP situation and dynamics, right? Like, there needs to be a more coordinated effort on the part of our school officials to see what they can do to make sure more of their marginalized students are taking AP classes, right? Because as was stated before, that increases access, right? But we also have to address this sort of perfection culture that sort of permeates our schools and our life. This idea that, like, oh, you have to be taking this many AP classes and be getting straight A's and getting a 1600 so that you can go to Harvard and prove that your piece of paper is better than everybody else's piece of paper. Like, no, that is a very toxic dynamic. We need to normalize people saying, okay, maybe I didn't have a 4.0, but look, I worked my hardest, I had no missing assignments, and I got my 3.3, and I'm going to CCBC. That's just as valid and just as commendable as any other educational pursuit, because either way, you're working to do what you need to do for your life and bettering yourself, right? So when we talk about this conversation of like racial equity or socioeconomic equity and justice, a big part of that is getting rid of this perfection culture and not making everybody a cookie cutter standard that they need to aspire to, but meeting people where they are and saying, okay, as long as you're doing your best and we, the school system, are doing what we need to do to make sure that you can do your best, that's a success in our eyes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Oh, sorry, Josh.
No, you go.
Yeah, what Nick said, it's like, exactly, it was like, throughout my whole like school career, it's all about you what your grades are on this piece of paper or online. And me personally, coming from, I guess, at first, like, you know, first
generation.
First generation. Yeah, they are obviously harder on you. My mom, she was a very, you would call a good perfectionist. You know, she was one of those 4.0 kids, all A's, and she expects the same for her, but it's for her children, but better, right? So I'm not gonna sit up here and say I'm not like I'm obviously, and when they see their kid as this, like, oh, like they're struggling, you're like, why are you struggling? I did this. Your siblings are doing better. Why they can start to compare, and it makes you feel like why am I not getting it, right? It makes you, and yeah, going back to like you asking for help and say, hey, like, because like I'm obviously from, like, it makes you step back, especially for my race, to like, oh, she's not getting it because she's not paying attention. It's that lack of empathy. Going back to that lack of empathy, I feel like it's more like, and it makes me want not to ask for help because I'm not the best at math and I've never been. And asking for help, especially when we were back in school, like back when I was like in like 7th grade, where my math teacher wasn't like the best math teacher, and I would ask her for help, and she was like, oh, it's because you're not paying attention. Oh, it's this way, and it makes you not want to like it makes you want to step back and say, like, you know what, I quit, like I don't want to do this anymore. And that's where I feel like a lot of mistakes happen. And I like, people that are watching this, I want to say that it's okay to not to like have your moments. It's okay to feel that way, especially like when you come from a first generation like I am. And I could feel like what you feel, because it's obviously hard on you, because you're like, hey, that your parents did this. You need to be better than them. And when it's okay to get that 3.0, it's okay to go to CCBC. And my mom might not like that, but you need to do the best for you and make what makes you happy. And that piece of paper that you're going to get at the end of the year, or when you go to college and you go across the country or even leave the country, just make sure that you're happy and that you're not in a mental state that you have to do this, and it makes you want to break down and cry.
Yeah. Sahib, I saw you have your hand.
Yeah, just adding on to that, like especially about being first gen, and kind of like I'm personally very fortunate that my parents aren't really strict, because they know that I'm striving to do my best. But then on the more unfortunate side, I tend to push myself a lot to kind of be like that perfectionist, or whatever it is, try to get good grades, and like how was mentioned, AP scores and AP classes and everything. And I feel like it's also the environment. So I've went to both magnet, middle, and high. And there's nothing wrong with going to magnet schools, but I feel like when we are in that environment, we strive to push ourselves even further, because we're in a group with many different types of students from different parts of the county even. So we're like, okay, like, I'm going to magnet school, so I have to do better. And it's like the magnet school environment, I feel from conversations I've had with my friends that go to their zone school, and if anybody wants to pitch in here, is that going to a magnet school and zone school is a little bit different, because the environment's different. Like you kind of like apply to go to a magnet school. So one, it's like a different experience of just going there. And then that you're there, it's like a competitive experience of, like who's taking more APs, or whose GPA is higher, or who has a higher class rank. And whether or not that's, like striving to fit in because you're first gen, or because you're an immigrant, or, because your parents are pressuring you, or you're pushing yourself, either way, like those standards really push us. And like Kazia was saying, like you have to really prioritize your mental health, which a lot of students don't, because we're pushing ourselves too much to make sure that we're fitting in first, and we're, like ahead of the competition, and we're able to compete with people. And I think like that is that like perfectionist stigma that we grow up with, that Nick was mentioning earlier. So I definitely agree with most of the things that have been said so far.
Yeah, I want to agree with her, because this is I'm in 9th grade. I'm going to Eastern. So this is my first time being in a magnet school, being throughout my life, middle and elementary school. Yeah, it's a huge difference from being in a zone school, because, being in a zone school, you like, I guess it's more laid back, and you're like, hey, like I'm trying to do my best, but it's more competitive. I saw the shift. I especially, like, I'm probably my first 2 weeks in Eastern. I saw the shift. It's not a drastic shift, but it is a shift where you say like, hey, what are you doing? What AP classes are you doing? It's like, oh, what AP classes are you doing next year? I was like, oh, I'm probably only going to do one. Why are you doing one? There's so many. I'm just like, oh, like, I don't know. And it's more like they try to like, it's more like, okay, I want to stay in this school. Being in this all magnet school, I cannot fail. And that's what you going through your head, that like, this is, if you fail, you're out of here. You're gone. And that's what, like, you have to have that perfection motive, and also being, you know, with the frustration of your parents, it kind of does like take a toll of your mental health. It's just like balance beam that you're like, okay, I got to keep up with school, and then I got to like keep my parents happy. And then it's like this little balance beam. And that's, yeah.
No, that's really great points to end this conversation. And I just want to say that I do resonate with a lot of your comments about perfectionism. I know that I go to Dunluck High School, and whenever anybody hears Dunluck High School, you don't think about academics or high performing extracurriculars. You think about the low test scores, low grades, high suspension rates. But and I guess like I get two of both worlds. Although I do go to Dunluck High Schools, I did participate in programs that were for academically challenging students who wanted to go to like Ivy Leagues, for example. So I would do a pre-college program at Harvard a semester because that's where I wanted to go, and I would take certain courses. And at times it became so toxic where I was trying to compare myself with my peers and making sure I'm the best, I'm getting scoring the highest. But it was really during 11th grade where I was like, it doesn't really matter how many AP scores you're going to go after you're going to get in. It doesn't really matter what classes you take, because ultimately colleges are going to get like 50,000 applications, and only like 300, 2,000 are going to get in. So just do what you love to do, take the classes that you're passionate about, and you get in. And I think that's my best advice. And I really hope that what we can take away from this discussion is that I don't want our students to feel that their race, their gender, their identity, or their socioeconomic level in any way is a challenge and a wall in their way for success. I think a lot of us can relate that we have used our experiences to seek better opportunities, to strive for more. And I hope that our students feel encouraged. And I know we're going to work on the board side, we're going to work in our individual schools, but I hope this discussion allowed us to share our opinions, and also gave our students some hope. Thank you. Last comment, I'm going to give it to one person, and I'm going to give it to Paige. I knew she was about to comment, but I guess to conclude this discussion, what do you take away from equity, and what do you hope to see?
I got like a better idea of how everyone's different schools are, and I appreciate that because I've only been in like magnet schools my whole life, like majority white schools, so I didn't really understand what's going on in other schools. And I think that there's a lot of room for change in like our school district when it comes to equity. Like I don't know. I feel like, well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Marcellus, because the analogy that you gave about the difference between equality and equity, that like was kind of an eye opener, because I was like, oh, I kind of didn't understand what equity was until I came here. So I guess like I'm just really thankful for this opportunity. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's great. And a lot of people who talk about equity and equality at times don't really understand the nuance of it until they're older, probably. And at times it doesn't even happen in school. It's more mainly like chats like this or different conferences they go to. And I think it's really important. And I hope we can have more conversations, whether on this topic or other topics that may arise. And I thank you all for being here. And thank you, our audience, for watching this episode of Chat Cafe. See you next time.